There are some faces that become so deeply woven into the fabric of Hollywood that even when they quietly step back, you never really stop thinking about them. Elisabeth Shue was one of those faces. She had this rare quality, the kind that made you believe every single thing she was feeling on screen. You could see it in her eyes, in the way she held a moment without rushing it, without performing it. Whether she was running through the neon-soaked chaos of Las Vegas, or standing at the edge of something beautiful and terrifying on a New Jersey summer night, she made you feel like you were right there beside her, breathing the same air, carrying the same weight. And then, almost without a sound, something shifted. The woman who had earned an Academy Award nomination, the actress critics once called one of the most emotionally honest performers of her generation, seemed to quietly step away from the Hollywood machine that had celebrated her so loudly. Not with a scandal, not with a breakdown, just gradually with a kind of silence that left people searching for an explanation. Fans started to notice. Social media threads began filling up with the same question, asked over and over with a mix of nostalgia and genuine concern. Whatever happened to Elisabeth Shue? Was she okay? Had something gone wrong behind the scenes? Had Hollywood turned its back on her, or had she made the far more deliberate choice of turning her back on Hollywood? The answer, when you actually take the time to look for it, is far more surprising than most people expected. Because Elisabeth Shue's story is not a story about fading away. It is a story about choosing something real over something shiny, about a woman who always contained more depth than the roles she was handed, and about what happens when a genuinely talented person quietly decides to live life entirely on her own terms. This is her story, and it begins long before any camera ever found her. Elisabeth Shue grew up in a world that looked picture-perfect from the outside. A comfortable childhood in New Jersey, a structured family life, the kind of upbringing that seemed to point toward stability rather than stardom. But underneath all of that comfort, there was something restless living inside her, something that didn't quite fit the frame. She wasn't chasing fame. She was chasing something harder to name, something closer to meaning. And that difference, that subtle but profound distinction between wanting to be seen and wanting to actually matter, would quietly shape every decision she ever made. What makes her story so genuinely fascinating is not just the roles she played, but the way she played them. And not simply the moments she stood in the spotlight, but what she chose to do and what she chose to walk away from when the spotlight finally moved on. Long before the world knew her name, Elisabeth Shue was simply a girl trying to figure out where she belonged. She grew up in South Orange, New Jersey, surrounded by the kind of quiet suburban life that can easily lull a person into a comfortable kind of predictability. But from an early age, she carried an energy that didn't quite fit the mold around her. She was curious in the way that restless people are curious, not just about facts, but about the deeper texture of things. And there was always this underlying sense that the world she was living in was smaller than the one she could feel inside herself. Her family carried its own complications. Her parents divorced when she was young, and she and her siblings were raised primarily by their mother. It wasn't always easy. The kind of emotional complexity that comes from a fractured home life has a way of doing one of two things to a person. It either shuts them down or cracks them open. For Elisabeth, it cracked something open, something deep and searching and unusually perceptive. She took her education seriously in a way that stood out even then. She attended Wellesley College, one of the most demanding academic institutions in the country, studying political science before eventually transferring to Harvard. Yes, Harvard. This was not someone drifting through life on natural charm. This was someone who genuinely wanted to understand the world, to engage with ideas that mattered, to become more than a surface. But acting had already begun pulling at her quietly and persistently. She started getting small jobs, commercials, auditions in drafty waiting rooms. The grinding, invisible work that most people never see before the spotlight arrives. And even in those early moments, the people who worked alongside her noticed something they couldn't quite explain. There was a naturalism to her. She didn't seem to perform. She simply was. Her brother Will was also chasing the same dream, and the two of them shared that creative hunger, that conviction that storytelling was worth something. But Elizabeth's path was about to take a turn that neither of them could have fully anticipated, because a role was coming. A role so perfectly matched to her warmth and her quiet intelligence that it would introduce her to millions of people all at once. In a single summer moment that an entire generation would carry for the rest of their lives. She wasn't out there hunting for it, she was simply ready for it. And in Hollywood, sometimes that is the only difference that matters. When Elisabeth Shue stepped onto the set of The Karate Kid, something clicked into place. She was cast as Ali Mills, the girl next door with genuine warmth and an almost effortless chemistry with her co-star. It sounds deceptively simple on paper. But what she brought to that role was anything but simple. Ali wasn't written as a fully rounded character. In lesser hands, she could have been a placeholder, a pretty face to motivate the hero. But in Elizabeth's hands, Ali became a real person. Someone with her own internal life, her own quiet convictions, her own kind of courage that didn't need to announce itself. Audiences felt it immediately, even if they couldn't have articulated why. Here was a young woman on screen who simply felt real, not manufactured. Not carefully polished into something designed to be palatable, just real. And in a summer blockbuster aimed at teenagers, that kind of unguarded authenticity was rare enough to be genuinely noticed. The film became a cultural phenomenon. Suddenly, Elisabeth Shue was everywhere. Magazine covers, her name spoken in the same conversations as the biggest young talents in Hollywood. Doors that had been sealed quietly began to open, but something unexpected happened next. Instead of lunging toward the next commercial opportunity, she paused. She kept working, yes. But she also kept returning to school. She had this deeply unusual quality for someone living inside the Hollywood machine. She genuinely valued her education more than her momentum. At a time when most young actresses would have abandoned everything to ride the wave, she went back to Harvard. She kept studying. She kept becoming. People in the industry didn't quite know what to make of it. Was she not serious about acting? Was she not hungry enough? Was she hedging her bets against a career she wasn't sure she trusted? None of the above. She was doing something far more interesting. She was building a foundation beneath herself. She was insisting on becoming a full person before she allowed herself to become a famous one. And that choice, that quiet insistence on wholeness over celebrity, would eventually lead her to one of the most astonishing performances anyone in Hollywood would see for a very long time. The industry was watching, even when it pretended it wasn't, and the right role was getting closer with every passing season. The next chapter of her story would take her somewhere much darker, much more demanding, and much more exposed than anything a sun-drenched blockbuster summer could ever ask of her. There is a performance that permanently changed the way Hollywood looked at Elisabeth Shue. A performance so raw, so fully surrendered, so emotionally fearless that it silenced every critic who had ever quietly underestimated her. That performance came in Leaving Las Vegas. She played Sierra, a woman surviving on the margins of a city designed to consume people, and she played her without vanity. Without the protective distance that most actors unconsciously maintain when a role becomes this difficult, this exposed, this close to something painful and true. She gave the character everything she had, and then she gave a little more. The world took notice in a way it hadn't before, an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress, a Golden Globe nomination. Critics who had watched her in supporting roles for years suddenly writing with a kind of startled reverence, as if they were only now realizing what had been standing in front of them all along. The film itself is brutal and beautiful in equal measure, and she carries it with a grace that can only come from total, undefended commitment. What made it even more striking was the full arc of where she had come from. Here was the warm, sunny girl from The Karate Kid, the adventurous babysitter from Adventures in Babysitting, the accessible, likable presence that audiences had trusted for years. And she had walked straight into one of the most psychologically complex roles in American cinema and owned it completely. Hollywood was shocked, but perhaps it never should have been, because anyone who had been paying close attention would have seen this depth coming from a long way away. It had always been there, quietly waiting beneath the warmth, beneath the effortless likability, beneath the smile that made her so easy to root for. The success that followed was real and significant. Major films, critical respect that felt genuinely earned, a reputation that placed her among the most capable actresses working in American cinema. But here is exactly where her story becomes something altogether more interesting. Because at the precise moment when most actors would have doubled down, when they would have chased that Oscar momentum and flooded the market with carefully chosen prestige projects, Elisabeth Shue did something that quietly stunned the people around her. She fell in love, she got married, and she began making choices that genuinely confused the very industry that had just finished celebrating her loudly. The man she married was director Davis Guggenheim, and what unfolded after that is not a straightforward story of sacrifice nor of loss. It resists that kind of easy framing. It is a story about choices, about what a person decides truly matters once they finally have everything the world spent years telling them to want. They built a life together, a real one. 3 children, a home, the kind of daily existence that exists almost entirely outside the frame of celebrity. And Elisabeth, this woman who had always prioritized her humanity over her fame, found herself drawn more and more powerfully toward the life she was constructing rather than the career she had already earned. She kept working, but the rhythm changed, the urgency softened. And in Hollywood, where momentum is treated like oxygen and any pause is read as a sign of struggle, slowing down is almost always interpreted as falling down. There were whispers the way there always are. Was her career finished? Had the industry moved past her? Had she made too many quiet choices, stepped back too many times, said no to too many rooms that would not stay open forever? But those questions were asking the wrong thing entirely. Because what was actually happening was something far more deliberate than decline. She was choosing, consciously, intelligently, on her own timeline and nobody else's. And that is a profoundly different thing from being forgotten. She had always been someone who thought carefully about what she put into the world. The return to school after sudden fame. The Harvard years spent quietly building herself. The willingness to disappear completely into leaving Las Vegas when playing it safe would have been so much easier. Every decision in her life pointed toward the same fundamental truth about her character. She was not someone who needed Hollywood's approval to feel complete. But there was more to this particular chapter. Because the entertainment world was changing dramatically around her in ways that would eventually open doors that the old industry never could have offered. Streaming, long-form television, the quiet collapse of the studio hierarchy that had once dictated what a serious film career was meant to look like. Everything was shifting. And Elisabeth Shue was about to reappear in the conversation in a way that reminded an entirely new generation of viewers exactly why she had always mattered. What happened next surprised even the people who had been following her from the very beginning. She came back, not with a grand announcement, not with a carefully managed comeback narrative or a press tour designed to reintroduce her to a world that had supposedly moved on. She simply kept showing up, quietly, consistently. And the work, as it always had for her, spoke entirely for itself. Television gave her something that film had sometimes withheld, the space and the time to inhabit a character in full. To let a performance breathe and deepen across episodes rather than compress everything into 2 hours. Her role in CSI, Crime Scene Investigation, brought her to a vast global audience, many of whom had never seen Leaving Las Vegas, never grown up watching The Karate Kid, never tracked her earlier work at all. To them, she was something new and immediately compelling, an intelligent, grounded presence on screen who made everything happening around her feel more truthful and more alive. And then came Cobra Kai. The Netflix continuation of the Karate Kid universe brought her back as Ali Mills, the very role that had first placed her in front of the world. And rather than feeling like a nostalgic exercise, like a celebrity agreeing to revisit their past for the sake of recognition, the return felt entirely earned. She brought the same authenticity to Ali that she had always brought, only now there was something else layered beneath it. The depth that only comes from time, from lived experience. From all the choices, large and quiet and in between, that shape a person into someone worth watching. Fans who had carried her with them for decades felt something unexpectedly moving about seeing her again. And younger viewers encountered her for the very first time with no nostalgia at all, just the simple and immediate recognition that something real was happening on screen. The question that had worried so many people, the fans who had been quietly asking if she was okay, began to find its answer. Fully, unhurriedly, in the way that real answers tend to arrive. She was not only okay, she was exactly who she had always been, a woman who had never truly left. Who had simply been living, fully and intentionally, making choices that mattered more to her than the opinions of an industry she had never needed to validate her. Refusing, at every turn, to let the noise of celebrity define what her life was worth. Her legacy in Hollywood is quietly extraordinary in the way that the most honest things tend to be. She belongs to that rare group of actors who resist easy categorization because she never allowed herself to become just one thing. She was the girl next door and the Oscar nominee. The blockbuster sweetheart and the serious dramatic actress. The Hollywood name and the Harvard student. The devoted mother and the working artist. She held all of those contradictions simultaneously, without apology and without explanation. as if it had never occurred to her that she was supposed to choose between them. There is something worth sitting with in that. In an industry that applies relentless pressure on people to pick a lane and stay in it forever, Elisabeth Shue kept insisting on being complicated. On being complete, on being a human being first and a famous person second. And that insistence, quiet as it always was, turned out to be the most radical thing about her. She is, by any honest reckoning, one of the most quietly remarkable careers in the history of Hollywood. Not because of the sheer volume of what she produced, but because of the quality, the integrity, and the unmistakable humanity of every choice she made along the way. And the fans who were shocked to discover she had simply been living, building a family, stepping in and out of the spotlight entirely on her own terms. Those fans perhaps weren't truly worried at all. They were missing her, and the beautiful thing, the thing that makes her story worth telling and worth hearing, is that she was always there. She simply understood, better than most people ever do, what was worth holding onto. Elisabeth Shue's story is a reminder that the most interesting Hollywood journeys are rarely the loudest ones. They are the ones lived with intention, shaped by values that reach deeper than fame, and carried forward by a quiet conviction that a full life is worth more, infinitely more, than a famous one. She had the Oscar moment. She had the blockbuster summer. She had the critical acclaim and the cultural recognition that most people spend their entire careers reaching for. And then she chose something harder to define and far too easy to dismiss. She chose herself. So here is the question worth sitting with, and we would genuinely love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. In a world that rewards visibility above almost everything else, is Elisabeth Shue's quiet, intentional path the most radical thing a Hollywood star can do? Or is it simply what wisdom looks like when it finally, honestly arrives? If this story moved you, drop your thoughts below. And if you want more stories like this one, the Hollywood journeys that don't get told loudly enough, subscribe and stay with us. There are so many more where this came from.